Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Chris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Chris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Chris and Bill Tenney-Britton here today to talk about the COVID conflict. You know, that fight you're having in your congregation. Do we go back to in-person worship, or do we stay online, or do we keep doing drive-in, or do we keep doing outdoors? Good luck with that if you're in Nebraska today.
Oh my goodness. But the answer to that is pretty simple. Is it safe, right? Is that the question? The fight, is it safe? And a lot of us are fighting over that. And the way to figure that out is call your health department. Your health department will tell you whether it's safe to be worshiping in the size of your worship space with your average attendance. Talk to the health director or to the assistant director.
To people who are trained in this stuff.
Right, exactly. Who are on that forefront, not who somebody, it's the horse's mouth, if you will. And we know a church that they were asked to do an adult baptism, a believer's baptism, a dunking baptism. And so they asked the health department. The health department said, no, but call us back another time. And so later on, they called them back and the health department said, yes, but, and they gave them the safe way to do that baptism.
The reality is, though, the underlying question of all this is can we even be church without in-person worship? You know, once upon a time, and I'm talking once upon a time, the church didn't have buildings, but that was a brief period of time compared to the almost 2,000 years, not quite 1,700 years, that we have had buildings and worship in sanctuary and corporate group worship. That has become the staple of what the church is today. So really, can you be a church without in-person worship? That's really the real question.
Oh, come on. Everybody knows this. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the door. There's all the people.
That's right, because they have to come to the church building,
Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the doors. And where are the people?
They're all at home with COVID.
Yeah. And we also know that you may have heard this question for years and years and years, particularly if you've ever been in any kind of leadership. The church is what remains after your building burns down.
The church is the people. The problem with that answer is it tends to be really simplistic.
It is.
Everyone knows the church is the people. We all say that. We all believe that. Actually, we mostly just assent to it. I don't know that we believe it because belief drives our behavior, and we really have taken the church as the people, say, yeah, but we have to worship together in a larger group for it to really be worship. And that simplistic answer just doesn't seem to reflect a reality, because it's really about what are we doing? How do we do it? Where do we do it? What are the tools that we have to be worship?
Well, and I want to take that. It really is about location for so many people. We started a church in Seattle a number of years ago now, and we had different small groups, and one of those met in the cabana of our apartment complex. And that question of, was that really worship or wasn't it really worship?
And it wasn't a Bible study. We did worship.
We were doing worship.
Communion,
but was it,
and music and all the rest.
Was it really worship?
Yeah, well, that's
right.
And was it really church?
Right. So, and where we came, we had to wrestle with that. And when we got to the point was, yeah, that is really worship then, but it was really hard to get people to invite people to come to a worship service that was in a cabana. Some people came because that was a pretty cool and novel idea, but others were like, what? Who are you people?
Well, later on, we went in and we started house churches up and down the I-5 corridor there on the West Coast. We had churches from the north end of the I-5 down into California, and our denomination didn't know what to do with this, because what is a pastor who is of a small group? How do you call that person a pastor? And you don't meet in corporate worship other than in your living room.
Yeah.
How is that really a church? And yet, and we'll talk about this at another episode, the reality is every church pretty much on this planet, and almost guaranteed your church, started in somebody's living room.
Yeah.
It started in someone's garage. It started with a handful of people. And that was what church was. It wasn't about your building.
Yeah.
It was about coming together.
Well, but all of that, I mean, we can have those conversations, but really that's not a solution, because it's easy to disagree with that. It's easy to blow it off. I mean, how many of us have had this conversation? If you're watching this, more than likely you're having this conversation, or you're concerned about having this conversation.
Or you're avoiding having the conversation.
Are we really having worship? And we watch and follow dozens, literally dozens and dozens of ministers and churches, and in talking to ministers, there's that question: what do we need to be doing? What do I need to do? What can I do? What can't I do for this to actually be a worship service? And then there's this other people. How can I, this other part of that, how can I convince my people to understand or to believe this, so that this is worship for them? But which I want to say most of us, right, most of the ministers in that conversation, this is a stopgap measure.
What we're doing right now.
Right now, yes, stopgap.
Digital stuff.
This is not the way, we really want it to be, because worship has to be in a sanctuary, right?
Well, how many pastors do we know who are going every week to their sanctuary and broadcasting from their sanctuary, because that's the only place worship can be. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some advantages of doing that. I mean, if you have your organist or your pianist and whatnot, and you can do social distance, and it looks and feels in some ways like real church. The problem that we're finding, and I'm finding, is that we're watching worship. We're sitting in front of Facebook or YouTube or our website or Roku TV or whatever, and there is no audience participation. In fact, that's the problem, is it's an audience, not a congregation. And which really exacerbates that question, right. Is that really worship? Is it really doing church when we're letting the alpha waves go?
We have a lot of people, I mean, let's be real. We have a lot of people that watch. Joel Osteen is the one that comes to mind, but it could, older people's Jimmy Swaggart, Oral Roberts, right?
Craig Rochelle,
right? Who you can watch on television, or you can go to church any number of times on a Sunday. I mean, I talked to a minister recently. They went to church 4 times
on
a Sunday. Right.
Yeah, but even then, are you worshiping? Is that worship? And there's the question. And when it comes back to looking at your situation and where you are, and the fight that you're probably having, whether it's a upfront big time conflict or whether it's just underneath and we're sort of discussing it, the reality is in building or not in building, and is it legitimate? Is this the way it has to be, or can't we somehow bend the rules? And the reality is that effective leaders have to reframe the question.
And that question really is then, are we talking about our building? Are we talking about being a church?
And that's really the question. Building or church? Are we fighting about the building, which is a tool for ministry? It's a good tool for ministry, but that's all it is. Globally, there are churches meeting. In fact, probably there are more churches meeting not in buildings than in buildings on a global basis. There's more house churches than there are in-person worship sanctuaries. So, yes, this is the way we've always done it, but we're in a different season. And is it safe to meet? Is it wise to meet? Or can we figure out, again, are we talking about our building? Or are we talking about being a church? And we need to reframe that question.
That's what the question we want to leave with you this week. Maybe have that with some of your church leaders, or if you're a church leader, have that question with your pastor. What are we really talking about? Safety? Are we talking about our building? Or what are we talking about being a church?
It's a theological question that you have to wrestle with. I want to just share that to perhaps help you out with it. Net Results has put together a compendium, if you will, a new ebook of the articles that we put together, have written on the COVID crisis, and it's available at effectivechurch.net. Next week, we're going to talk about what are the components, what is it take to be a church in these days or in any day.
But for right now, we are out of time, so say goodbye.
Goodbye. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.